I'm Michael Guthrie. I am Head of Service for Climate and Nature Delivery within the Combined Authority. I think Alice, you may have had contact with Roger, who's the Director of Environment. Roger's up in Leeds at UK Reef today, so he's unable to host this call for us. We'll go very quickly into the presentation, so people have an opportunity to ask questions at the end. But just to flag that, this is clearly an area that's really important for the Combined Authority. We have a relatively strong team, big team looking at net zero. We also have a team. We host the Southwest Net Zero Hub as well, and we're also increasingly looking at climate resilience in the context of, for me, is almost like one of those forgotten things around, lots of focus on net zero, but also climate resilience. We need to do some preparation as well. So it's really an area that's really increasingly important for us as a Combined Authority, and I think increasingly important for the region in terms of thinking about how we enable good green growth to support growth as a whole, and how we ensure that we are a climate resilient region. That means that we are not restricting growth in the future by not preparing for the climate impact as they come through. So something that really close to our work within the Combined Authority. So really pleased to have you come and do this presentation and have this conversation afterwards. Ian, shall I pass over to you and let you introduce yourself as you go through? Are you kicking off on this one? Or
yes,
is it Alice?
Yeah.
Okay,
thank you very
excellent.
Much
I'll hand over.
Thank you, and great to see everyone. And I think what we hope to do with this webinar is to introduce some of the ideas, findings, resources that we can offer from universities of Bath, Exeter and Surrey that we're all tied up in some big research programs, lots of teaching in this area, and also we're trying to make partnerships with local government in applying some of the results of the research that we've been doing, and to help policy development along. And what I want to do, and I think this will usefully fit with what you're going to be hearing later on from Alice and Lorraine, describe a project that we completed, a 3-year project under the auspices of the ESRC Place-Based Climate Action Network, or PCAN for short. And what we were doing was looking at the nature of multi-level governance in Surrey in relation to climate, mainly climate change mitigation. But I completely take the point that adaptation has got to really rise up the agenda from now on. And we've taken the title for the webinar, the Local Climate Governance, Messy Realities and Missing Links, because it really fits in with some of the results that we got from the work in Surrey. So I'll take you through the project. I'll put it in context and discuss one of the major recommendations that we made, which I'm glad to say that Surrey County Council is taking up. We've yet to see whether we can get the funding really to follow this through, but see what you think. And I'm hoping there'll be a proposition at the end that West of England Combined Authority will be excited about. So let me kick off. I hope you can all see these slides clearly enough. So the context for the discussion that we've got today, I've got a couple of slides on this. I won't labour these points because they'll be very familiar to everyone. But just to say that we've got a lot of clear weaknesses and threats when we think about climate governance in the UK and beyond. Progress is not fast enough. There are lots of impressive examples in the UK, especially on mitigation, but we really aren't doing well at all on adaptation and resilience, and we're not being fast enough on mitigation. And there are also some worrying signs of a weakening political consensus and weakening consensus across the media about net zero strategy and targets, which will be very familiar to you all. And we've also got, by and large, a very top-down approach to climate action, and it's very focused on technology. So there's been an avoidance of the challenges of behaviour change, lifestyle change, thinking about values and ethics, and a lack of attention. This has been highlighted by the work of the Access programme led by University of Exeter, lack of attention to what we call mid-level actors, regional, local community institutions. We don't just mean councils there, we're talking about schools, we're talking about universities, all the mediating bodies, which can especially play a big role in place-based solutions which are appropriate and which can also touch on behaviour, lifestyle change and so on. We've also got a big opportunity with the reorganisation of local and regional governance, but if we look at the white paper, we may well ask, is it being ambitious enough? There's a lot of detail yet to fill in. And although the government is talking a good game about new powers and responsibilities, there's no sign yet for really radical rethinking of local government finance, which would help those powers and responsibilities take shape in a meaningful way. But there are some big opportunities. We've got really good evidence, which my colleagues will touch on, about public support for climate action. We've got a really strong evidence base, not just in the natural sciences and in technology, but also in the UK social science base on understanding climate and environmental issues. And the Access programme, the CAST programme, CUSP, all of which are represented here, have got an awful lot to offer to combined authorities, local actors of all kinds. We've also seen, and I'll touch on this, some really interesting innovations in governance, which have happened despite lack of direction from governments of all stripes over recent years. So we've seen, for example, the rise of local and regional climate commissions, which were not sanctioned or supported by central government, but have been flourishing to varying degrees in cities and regions around the UK. They're part of a broader movement of grassroots initiatives, and we've seen, for example, lots of climate assemblies being developed at local scale, and some innovations in financing. And although there are reservations about the government's devolution agenda, it does offer a big opportunity, and I'll come back to that for us in thinking about how we proceed with climate governance. So I just want to highlight where we are now with the case study that we've done of Surrey over recent years. I'll rush through this because I don't want to take up too much time, but I'll make these slides available, and we can come back to specific points in discussion if you wish. So the aim of this was to work with the intuitions that we picked up from our own experience of working with local government in the county from the University of Surrey, and comments made by policy makers and politicians locally, that they were very frustrated with the state of climate policy in the UK. They felt as though local action was being stymied, and we decided we would map and explore activity about climate governance across all the levels of governance in Surrey. And crucially, that was not just about looking at the county council and the districts and boroughs. We also paid attention, and there's a big gap in understanding about this, we paid attention to what we call the micro local level, namely parish councils, town councils, and community initiatives which were spontaneously forming, especially around the time of the school strikes for the climate and Extinction Rebellion. We picked Surrey partly because that's where we are, but also because it has got fairly complex multi-level governance. There are a large number of districts and boroughs. It's also a highly affluent county, and if we're going to succeed with net zero, it's the kind of place which has got to take a lead, not only in technological development, but also in shifting consumption patterns among the affluent, very affluent, who we know are highly significant for that. And like every other part of local government, it's been through very rapid policy shifts. It's under big pressures, especially to do with funding, but it was showing signs of some very interesting innovations in policy making on climate, despite all of those constraints. So we interviewed a lot of people across sectors at every level of local government, in business, in academia, within Surrey, to get their impressions of the state of climate governance. How is a county like Surrey organised to respond to the challenge of mitigation and adaptation? And we got a lot of clarity from that investigation. We did very extensive field work. We did a lot of case study work, And we mapped that against what was emerging not only in the academic literature, but also in the policy literature about local action and climate across the UK. And what we found was, above all, there was real frustration about lack of clarity about the division of labour, who is meant to do what about climate action. And there was a great frustration that it seemed that local actors did not have a sufficient mandate, even though there was a clear need for their engagement of all of their skills, their awareness of local needs and priorities. They felt as though they didn't have, from the current governance arrangements, a clear mandate to take action on climate, even though they could sense that this was something the public demanded, and also it was something they themselves wanted to do. They were frustrated as well by lack of joined-up policy at the national scale, and inconsistencies, for example, between the net zero agenda and the planning system. They were frustrated by the stress on technology in national net zero strategy, which many people felt paid inadequate attention to the demand side, to consumption changes, behaviour changes, lifestyles. And taking all that together, you ended up with a system whereby innovations were happening in a very improvised way, and in a system of what we call compensatory governance. In other words, all sorts of activity was taking place despite lack of mandate, lack of guidance, lack of clarity, and lack of consistency at the national scale. And we can see the emergence of local climate commissions, such as the one that we were a founding member of in Surrey, as a response to that. No one at national scale had asked us to do it. We were doing it because we felt the need to take more concerted action on climate. There was no higher level guidance, and so we were going to have to do it ourselves. But everybody was aware that that was making the best of a bad job to some degree, given the lack of national coherence about who is meant to do what in climate policy. And the recommendations that came through loud and clear was that we need to empower core institutions, for example, the county council or whatever emerges at the highest level in Surrey from the reorganisation, and also do something to empower the micro local level of governance. We found a lot of activity in parishes, town councils, neighbourhoods, places that are sometimes recognised as a distinct unit, even if they haven't got a council attached to them. An awful lot of appetite for engagement, but also huge frustration that people didn't know how to go about doing it. And our conclusion was that we needed somehow to develop what we called a climate constitution, which would be an accessible, approachable, coherent, locally determined understanding and representation about who should be doing what and where, and how all these different levels of governance should relate to each other. And we decided that one idea which has emerged in some of the policy literature and academic literature, especially from Jeff Mulgan at University College London, about the idea of mesh governance, that we don't just need vertical and horizontal lines, we also need a coherent map of diagonal lines and relationships, flows of funding and information, where we're dealing with what he calls whole of government problems. And there is no better exemplar of a whole of government problem than the climate crisis. What we recommend, amongst quite a lot of recommendations, the key idea is that we should be applying this idea of mesh governance, getting a much richer and clearer idea about the division of labour in a multi-level governance system for doing climate mitigation and adaptation in a timely and well-organised and well-resourced way. So the recommendation is that Surrey County Council, or whatever successor organisation there is, which is getting somewhere with this agenda, they're very excited by the idea of mesh governance. We think that they should be taking the lead in developing what we call a local climate constitution. This is something we're now seeking some funding for, and there is definitely appetite for this within Surrey. And this would bring in not only the existing county council and districts and boroughs, but also the parish and town councils and other actors. And the Climate Commission would be seen as a linchpin in all of this, because it spans all of the levels of governance, formal governance, and it also is cross-cutting when it comes to sectors. So it includes the private sector, universities, voluntary sector, and so on. And we would hope that Surrey could become an exemplar in this. But given the reorganisation that's going on, the fact that we're looking at combined authorities, strategic authorities, new unitaries, we think that there is a need for a really concerted programme of policy development on this front and lobbying of the government, which would involve the prospective new strategic authorities and unitaries with existing combined authorities who've been taking the lead. And WECA is a clear example of that, with the very impressive climate and ecological strategy plan that you've developed and other initiatives. So what we would like to see, and it'd be great to hear your views on this, is a piloting with other combined authorities and the shadow mayoral authorities, as in Surrey, of what we're calling a process to create multi-level climate constitutions, which would show what the division of labour should be, come up with a clear view of flows of data and funding, identify roles, responsibilities, and key relationships, and start building up capacity. And we think this is the ideal time to do it, and we're not going to get another chance at local government reorganisation for some time. So this seems like a great moment to be having this kind of discussion. So that's a lot to build on work in Surrey, but we think the case of Surrey has got much wider resonance, and there's a link to the report that we wrote for PCAN. There are academic papers as well, but also some policy briefing notes. So I'm very happy to pick up any of those points, and if people are interested in exploring what we've done in more depth, we can come back to that in discussion or offline. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ian. Shall I start my presentation now? Follow straight on from that.
I think that'd be good, and then we can come at the end to pick
Excellent.
up all of the bits together.
Okay, in that case, I'll just try and share my screen if you give me a moment, please. Okay, hopefully you can see that.
Yes, great.
Visible, excellent. Okay, so just a quick introduction. So I'm Alice Moseley, and I'm an Associate Professor of Public Policy and Administration at the University of Exeter. As Ian said, I'm involved with Ian, with Lorraine and others in a variety of research projects in this sort of space, one of which is the Access project. And I'm presenting today the survey findings, or just a highlight, a selection of highlights from the survey, actually, which we conducted back in July, just before the general election, to explore public attitudes towards net zero, and in particular, their views around support for net zero targets, as well as how people feel that policy should be made in this area. And I'll probably also provide some reflections based on research that I've done in connection with the Devon Climate Assembly, so the Citizens' Assembly that was conducted at Devon County level by a broad partnership of organisations. And so reflect on those. And also I'm engaged in an evaluation of the local nature recovery strategies. So it's various bits of work that I think sort of tie into some of the things that we're discussing today. So just moving on to give you a little bit of brief information about the survey itself. So we have a sample of around almost 3,000 people across all parts of the UK. And they're broadly representative on key variables, and we've put weightings to ensure that any underrepresentations are addressed in the analysis. So the survey findings you can see in detail in our report, which I've linked from the slide, so I'll provide those to you afterwards. But just a brief snapshot of things that I think are most relevant to this audience. First of all, we found that people, don't feel that they have a huge say in climate policy, and that's really relating to the national level. And people do recognise the role of a variety of actors in helping shape climate policy, and they feel that certain people should have influence, and those include experts, both inside and outside of government, but also crucially local authorities and elected politicians. But interestingly, they also highlight the role of representatives of affected communities and feel that they should have more say. And related to this, we were interested in people's views on the role of citizens' assemblies and whether they felt that those types of institutions should be supported. And we did find support for those and relatively little opposition. I'll get onto that slide in a minute. In terms of the fairness of climate policy, people in general were more likely to find climate policy as view it as unfair rather than fair. And also when we asked questions around the perceived co-benefits of climate action, issues around fairness and social justice came actually quite low on that. So it suggested people didn't always recognise that there could be potential additional benefits related to fairness with climate action. And then lastly, people were recognise the obstacles to climate action, and we'll get on in more detail to what those are, but some of those relate to the local level. So this is just a slide on opportunities to have a say. So we asked people the extent to which they felt they had opportunities, and you can see here that the majority feel that they don't have a huge amount of personal influence. In terms of implications, creating as many opportunities as possible for people to have a greater say in climate policy. And, we know that the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero are developing a national public engagement strategy, which is likely to have potential implications at local authority level. But also, we know that local authorities are working hard to engage publics themselves and different stakeholders in policy development and strategy. And the widespread use of local citizens' assemblies is such a good example of that, and has been quite important in I guess, putting public engagement on the agenda and giving people a say in the development of strategic responses to climate policy locally. And so, thinking around methods of engaging directly affected communities in conversations about tackling climate change is something that we feel should be emphasised more, and exploring those different mechanisms and methods for doing that. And that's something that we're doing in our research. So we didn't find much difference in terms of the breakdown across the UK in people's views on this. England, Scotland and Wales were all quite similar, with Northern Ireland respondents feeling they actually had a little bit more say than the other parts of the UK. So turning to the question of who should have a say, we asked people to give perspectives on this. We said that we will need new climate policies to meet climate change targets. That policy making is often shaped by different groups in society, and who they feel should have most influence on new climate policies. Really interesting here, the high role that local authorities could play and that people feel they should play. And you can see that they're kind of the second listed actor in terms of who should have at least some influence. And we can see from the list here, we have the experts as well, politicians inevitably, but also affected community representatives as well, quite high up there. And interestingly, the youth groups came so low down, which was an interesting finding, and mayors as well, quite relatively low down in terms of who should have most influence, which I know might be interesting in the Bristol context. We don't have this broken down into kind of west of England or Bristol data. Yes, indeed. So moving on, citizens' assemblies. Here we asked people whether they would support the creation of a permanent citizens' assembly on climate change, both for their local authority area and for the UK as a whole. And we can see here 45% supported them at local level, and 42% supported those at national level. And there was some opposition, but it was relatively low and comparatively, and quite a large proportion in the middle who were just unsure, presumably because these are quite novel innovations and not all were familiar with them. And we did provide a kind of detailed explanation in the survey of what those were. But I think this is quite an interesting one to think about, given that we were asking about the idea of a permanent assembly, which is quite different to what's been done to date across local authorities in the UK, where we've had much more ad hoc climate assemblies. And you can see this map here just shows the proliferation across different parts of Europe of these modes of public engagement. Moving on to challenges and obstacles, we can see a recognition there that lack of local authority finances is one challenge to achieving net zero targets in people's views, as well as a lack of investment in infrastructure, and also individual finances being right up there is very important. And then moving on to co-benefits. So we asked people about whether they felt action on climate change would create any additional co-benefits, and these were the ones listed. And we can see that, you know, less pollution, better physical health, and increased wildlife were those that were viewed as most likely to co-occur along with action on climate change. And then moving on to views on fairness, and I'm rattling through these, sorry, because of lack of time. But we can see that, you know, there are a range of views across the spectrum here, but in general, you know, there are relatively few who feel, you know, strongly that they give a fair outcome to people that are affected, and, you know, fairly polarised views on that issue. English respondents were actually most likely to view climate policies as unfair and biased as compared to other parts of the United Kingdom. I'm going to skip through this one because we don't have a huge amount of time, but we do have some data on the things that people are already doing in their own communities to tackle climate change in terms of both political and civic engagement and behaviour change related to their day-to-day lives. So a few implications here just to finish that are particularly relevant to local authorities. You know, we feel, although people don't feel they've got a huge influence on national climate policies, there's a huge scope for public engagement in local areas. And that could be particularly affected communities by, you know, the impacts of climate change, whether that's flooding, air pollution, and so forth, but also perhaps where new green technologies are being developed and are potentially controversial. And given the relatively good levels of support for permanent citizens' assemblies, you know, maybe it's time to build these more permanent structures for deliberative public engagement, alongside the kind of institutions that Ian was talking about, where you have the kind of multi-level governance issues and coordination function. Perhaps there's also a role for bodies that really are served specifically to engage the public. I won't go through all the benefits of those because of time, but I think just a couple of key things I think are important, particularly in a political environment, as Ian referred to, where there is, you know, some more politicization of the net zero agenda and the pro-environmental agenda. So, you know, including voices in deliberative engagement could be one way of kind of naturalizing opposition, you know, by being inclusive, but also trying to anticipate problems before they become too polarized. And indeed, the idea of kind of co-producing solutions through deliberation and public engagement can have that spin-off effect of mobilising further community action to help tackle the problems themselves, particularly in a constrained financial environment where more community action is only going to be a positive thing for local authorities. And there, you know, there could be a permanent standing body with rotating membership drawn by lot, so that, you know, you're not with the same group of citizens permanently. And then they could potentially be considering different issues as they rise up the agenda locally. And there are some examples of permanent citizens' assemblies in Paris and in Belgium already. And there's some links there on that. And then, yeah, finally, more implications on people's awareness that local authorities are lacking in resources to meet net zero targets and engage in climate actions and you know, pro-nature actions as well. So perhaps, people will be more supportive of actions when they perceive that they have both dual environmental and financial benefits. And given that people do recognise co-benefits of climate action, such as reducing pollution and improving health and well-being, these kind of things could be used to frame support for climate action and encourage people in terms of behaviour changes and so forth. So galvanising issues that could be used to craft messages by local policymakers. And then lastly, increasing importance of holistic thinking about environmental governance, and that chimes very much with what Ian was saying. It's harder for kind of opponents to climate action to when we frame the issues as also helping to save money, improve health, address social justice, and so forth. Okay, so I'll stop there, and I look forward to the discussions and following on this. Just sharing. Thank you.
Thanks. And so I'll pick up the baton and present for a few minutes as well. My name's Lorraine Whitmarsh, and I'm a professor of environmental psychology at the University of Bath, and also director of the Centre for Climate Change and Social Transformations, or CAST for short. So I think what I was just going to say for a few minutes really builds on what Alice has just said in particular. I think quite a lot of the themes, but also saying a little bit more about behaviour change in particular. So you may be familiar with some of these kind of statistics, but essentially what's really clear from analysis from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, but also the Committee on Climate Change and other analysis, is that technological change is not going to be enough to tackle climate change, sustainability goals. We also need social and behavioural change. The CCC, for example, have said it's around about 62% of the measures needed to reach net zero will involve consumer behaviour change. So that's changing diet, changing travel habits, energy saving, and so on. And actually the remainder is change by businesses and by leaders, and policy change and sort of wider structural change. So there actually, if you, depending on exactly how you label these things, there's definitely a big chunk that's consumer behaviour change. The remainder is kind of more professional business and policy change. So we are talking about the need for people to change quite profoundly. And one of the things that we try to emphasise is that it's important not to overemphasize people as being just consumers, that the only thing that they can do is to buy an electric vehicle or a heat pump, though those are very important things that make a difference, but that people are also citizens, investors, role models, organizational participants, so employers or employees, and within those many contexts and roles, they can have influence and agents. We're interested in the range of different roles that people can play in addressing climate change. And really directly picking up what Alice just said, actually, about co-benefits of climate change. We know that actually the term net zero doesn't necessarily resonate widely, and that there is polarization around some net zero policies. But actually, there is a lot of agreement about the need to reduce pollution and the need to have safer streets and so on, things that in the here and now and at a local level, people could benefit from quite tangibly. And the evidence is very convincing now, from the IPCC in particular. You can't really see the detail of this figure, but what this figure comes from the latest IPCC assessment that basically found that most of the measures to mitigate climate change on the demand side, that is to say, changing how we travel, our diets, how we consume, so the very sort of public-facing changes needed to tackle climate change have wider co-benefits in terms of health, well-being, prosperity, social inclusion, and so on. So the more I think we can emphasise that in our communications about measures to tackle climate change, the more we can forefront these tangible benefits, I think we can start to build more consensus and buy-in to the measures needed, and move away from a discourse around tackling climate change means sacrifice, which actually the evidence shows it improves well-being. But a lot of our work is focused on, well, how do you change behaviour? How do you actually get people to do things differently? One of the sort of nice models that we've used a bit is the behavioural insights team's upstream downstream model of behaviour change, where they differentiate upstream measures that government broadly can do. So this is around kind of more structural things, regulation, economic policy, and so on. The midstream, which is kind of potentially where local authorities probably come in, but also certainly businesses would come in there. So these are more kind of placemaking things and kind of changing the choice architecture, if you like, of what is available for people, so what services and products are available to people. Versus the downstream, which is really the information campaigns, informational approaches broadly come in here, which is where you're targeting the individual and their decision making. So trying to educate, change attitudes of individuals. And one of the most striking, I think, findings from all of this evidence base really is that the more upstream you go, the more effective it is to change behaviour. So just giving people information by itself tends to be only 2 to 3% effective in changing behaviour. Whereas the more you can change the system and make it easier for people to adopt low carbon habits and behaviours, the more you just make it kind of the cheapest and easiest and more natural thing through regulation, through economic policies, the more you get really significant levels of behaviour change, potentially up to 100%. To give you a few examples, nudging, you may have come across this, is sort of changing the choice architecture. So really just kind of making it easy for people to do the right thing. Even just increasing the availability of vegetarian and vegan options in canteens. So not taking away meat options, still having some meat options, but changing the proportion of vegetarian to meat. So in this study, it had been 1 in 4 of the options used to be vegetarian. They then increased that to 2 in 4. So still 50% of the options were meat. They saw an increase of up to 80% in plant-based sales. So a really easy nudge there. And similarly, even more convincing, actually, moving people onto green energy tariffs by default, people were significantly more likely to stick with that, even if it cost them a little bit more than when they had to opt in to have a green energy tariff. So a huge difference in the effectiveness there. Economic incentives, the evidence shows that the most effective way to cut car use is congestion charging. In London, up to 33%. And in many other cities are starting to do this. And obviously we're seeing this in the west of England as well, Bristol and Bath, and it's having a significant effect. And more generally, just changing the infrastructure, making it easier and more attractive for people to do the right thing. That might be in the urban environments, reallocating road space away from cars and giving more space to sustainable and active modes, significantly reduces car use as well. So broadly speaking, kind of sticks and carrots in combination work best, but certainly the more upstream you go, the more effective it is. And also it matters when you intervene. So actually habits are a big barrier to behaviour change. People are on autopilot quite a lot of the time, which means that they don't necessarily pay attention to information about alternatives. If you can intervene though when their habits are disrupted, we talk about kind of moments of change, and that might be moving house is the obvious one. That's the one that's most well evidenced. If you give people tailored information, public transport information and a free bus pass to use the bus shortly after they've moved house, that is significantly more effective in increasing public transport use than if you give the same intervention to people when they have not recently moved house, when their habits are more entrenched. So the evidence is starting to grow about the importance of timing when we intervene. And really just to build on, I think, what some of the things that Alice said, actually there is quite good public support for a lot of these sorts of upstream measures that we're talking about. So there is some controversy. There are vocal minorities that speak out about some of these things, but actually, depending on exactly which measure you're looking at, whether that be frequent flyer levies or kind of thinking about even low traffic neighbourhoods, actually more people support those sorts of measures than oppose them. But what we've also found is that perceived fairness is by far the strongest predictor of support for these measures. So the more people see these as being fair in terms of the distribution of benefits and not leaving certain groups behind and so on, but also about fairness in terms of having a say. So this point about kind of citizens' assemblies and things speaks to this. Actually, involving people in this policy design is really important. Very briefly, before I finish, just to say a few words about who we are. The Centre for Climate Change and Social Transformations has been going for about 6 years now. We're about 90 researchers and affiliates in several universities that you see there. The head office is at Bath, where I am. And we're basically social scientists looking at climate change mitigation and the role that people play as active agents of change, and looking at kind of how to change behaviour, lifestyles, and society more widely. And we have a number of research themes, including visioning, looking at future visions of low carbon society, learning from transformation that's happened in the past and is continuing to happen, testing out interventions, so actually evidence about what works to change behaviour, change organisations and practices, and engaging to embed these lessons. And we have lots of different projects. I don't have time to talk about these, unfortunately, but some of these are focused in the southwest, actually. So we've done evaluations of congestion charging in Bristol and Bath. We have projects looking at kind of engaging sports fans, including in this region and beyond. A lot of our work does look at the city level and that kind of local community level, actually, and really speaks to the point that's already been made about the increased trust that there is at that local level and the ability to tailor interventions more effectively at that local level. So we're really building a lot of evidence around that. And we have lots of toolkits and resources. Our website, cast.ac.uk, has lots of briefing papers and reports about a whole range of topics that I've touched on, but also has these kind of toolkits that you see here, and possibly the one that might be most relevant to you. I think they're all relevant, but the work that colleagues at Manchester University have done to develop a carbon and co-benefits decision support tool, that's the thing on the left there, which Greater Manchester Combined Authority now have embedded, and so they routinely use this, identifies the wider co-benefits of climate action. And by going through the process of identifying co-benefits, actually they've seen that they are more ambitious on climate as well as other areas. So this kind of just decision support tool has been rolled out more widely. WLGA is looking at it at the moment as well. So that might be something to pick up on. But we've also got engagement resources, for example, pen portraits on car use reduction, and a data portal that tracks public opinion and behaviours over time. And finally, our key messages report, which we put together a few months ago, that distills 5 years of research that we've been conducting, brings out really the role of people in climate action, why it's important to support people, showing that there is conditional support for climate action, that we need to involve people with different perspectives, that action is needed at all levels of society, and that we need the sticks and carrots approaches together, as well as the need for clear leadership. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Lorraine, Ian, and Alice, on that really helpful, really great presentation. I'm just going to, I probably have some questions, but I'm going to let others ask the questions first. So if people want to put hands up, then we can come to you with any questions. Can I? Oh, I haven't got any questions yet. Ian, can we just go back to your point to us around what you're potentially looking for, because we are clearly trying to convene stuff, so climate action within the region. What do you think is the specific ask around that? Is it us leading on something and engaging with the other MCAs, or have you already talked to some of the other MCAs already?
We haven't talked to the other MCAs, and we've been building up consensus within Surrey, really, for this idea that we should be pursuing a much more coherent idea of roles, responsibilities, relationships, who does what, where is the mandate for climate action to be located. We're calling that the climate constitution and the approach, as I mentioned, that we're drawing on in particular from the academic and policy literature, is this idea of mesh governance, that where you've got highly complex problems like climate change, which cover the whole of government, you need a clear picture of all of those roles and relationships at different levels, not just horizontal but vertical relationships. So it's an idea which has appealed to people within Surrey. It's something that we're trying to get some funding to explore a bit further. And one idea is that we might, as well as developing further ideas for a citizens' assembly, which could be permanent, would be to have a kind of climate constitutional convention of policy actors within the county, which would put all these ideas together and come up with a proposal which would then form the framework within which the new reorganised unitary strategic authority would take shape. And it seems to us that it would be very good if other actors within the reorganised local and regional governance system, who were also excited by that kind of thinking or were already doing that kind of thinking, could come together and come up with joint tasks of government. So that's as far as it's got at the moment. I'm really encouraged that we've got so much support within Surrey, which has been a conservative dominated area. You wouldn't necessarily expect them to be as radical as they have been, especially thinking about behaviour change, but they have. So we think that there's a real appetite to hear the sorts of messages that you've had from Lorraine and Alice, and to build on the insights that we've gained from the work that we've done, which I just presented to you. So at the very least, I think it would be a good idea to sound out actors like WECA and just see if there is an appetite for maybe doing some joint work on this with Surrey.
Yeah, I think I'd be keen to. We'll pick up with you on this, Ian. I think it will be interesting to see where it goes. Just to say that we also have a grouping of UK mayors, so just the sense of just being able to share through that network of similar sort of roles to ours across the other combined authorities as well. And it will be interesting for us to sort of engage with some of the new mayoralties who have quite a different political leadership as well, to see where that goes.
Exactly. I think the key message is don't let a good reorganisation crisis go to waste. This is the moment, if we're going to embed climate action really seriously within new governance systems, this is the time to do it.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just going to see if there's any questions. So Lucy, did you want to come in?
Yeah, can't resist a question. That was a really fascinating series of presentations. Thank you. Hi, yeah, I'm Lucy, Climate Resilience Manager. I'm really interested to what extent climate constitutions, commissions, assemblies are covering the climate adaptation resilience side of things, as well as net zero and possibly nature. So I'd love to hear a bit more from you on that. Thank you.
Well, just with respect to climate assemblies, very briefly, I mean, certainly the first wave of climate assemblies were very much focused on net zero and came around the time when climate emergencies were being declared by local authorities following Parliament's declaration of the same thing. But I think there's, and I suppose, there have been more and more popping up on different issues that will go beyond that. I would say in terms of resilience, I don't think there have been as many, but I think there have been some really interesting other deliberative engagement examples of community groups coming together to co-produce solutions for things like flooding. There was an interesting one of those in Crediton, near where I live, in Devon. And that was quite interesting because actually it led to communities wanting to take action themselves and looking beyond the local authority for solutions. There were certain things that they felt they could adequately address, related to flooding on roads and so forth and unblocking drains. So potentially those sorts of institutions, I think, can be done at different scales as well. So even at the micro level, going back to what Ian was saying, the very grassroots level. So I think for issues like that are very localized and place-based, I think those deliberative mechanisms can perform a really important role, even if they're not these formally organized citizens' assemblies, which are more resource intensive and so forth. But yeah, great question.
I think CCC has recently has done some stuff on adaptation and as part of a citizens' assembly, haven't they, as well? So at that national level too.
I would say I agree with everything that's been said there. I would say the climate commissions as well are realising the need now to move towards much more attention to adaptation, and probably we're facing a need now to start merging the agendas of mitigation and adaptation because there are so many synergies between them, and also think about the co-benefits for nature. So I think what we'll see is not just assemblies focusing on those issues together, but also the climate commissions that have been established and related strategies also looking at adaptation much more.
Yes, I mean, and talking of moments of opportunity and windows of opportunity, the local nature recovery strategies, obviously a huge opportunity for building in some of the, thinking more holistically about that. And lots of these decision support tools that you're talking about, that Lorraine mentioned, and there's others that focus more on nature-based solutions as well, that are being developed by Natural England and others that should soon be available. That I don't know if some of the authorities in your combined authority may have been part of that pilot potentially.
And we have got quite a good relationship, and we've already published our LNRS.
Yeah.
So moving that forward is something that we are, as a combined authority, certainly trying to tie up kind of messaging around kind of climate resilience, and how does nature recovery and nature-based solutions support that as well. I was just going to pick up Abby's question now, which is around people sort of getting kind of struggling to feel like what they do on an individual basis makes a difference. So her specific question was, are there learnings from the research about how to address frustrations while trying to affect wider behaviour change? So I guess there's that thing around, we recognise individuals need to do the behaviour change, but then there's the individual thing about how does it make a difference? So yeah, I'm sure you guys have got some responses around that.
Yeah, shall I start off? I think that's a really good point. And I think quite a lot of in as far as sort of messaging around what people can do exists, it often sort of focuses on relatively small scale consumer things that people can do. So like it might, whether that be kind of energy saving tips around the home, or even things that are quite expensive, but so buying a heat pump, for example, often which are out of reach financially for a lot of people, or might involve a lot of inconvenience or challenges. So which then can be, so they're frustrating in different ways. There's either a feeling like this is really a drop in the ocean, these behaviour changes really don't feel like they're amounting to anything, or actually I can't do any of these things anyway because I can't afford them. So I think people often do feel quite frustrated about when it is relegated to this is what you can do as a consumer. When we can sort of encourage people to think about the multiple roles that they have, so as citizens, for example, so this is how you could vote, that you can write to your councillor or your MP to sort of ask for support for doing some of these things, or you can act as a community, so try to get together a sort of local group of people to take action. And this is where we've seen a huge rise in demand for things like school streets, which has been fascinating, like in Bristol, for example. So actually this is about people getting together saying, we're going to, and not always for climate reasons, it can be more for these sort of co-benefit things like air quality or road safety for young people and so on. But actually, then people coming together as a group, then actually you can overcome that feeling of individual powerlessness. So yeah, we've done work around kind of climate anxiety, for example, which really, where people get together as a group, they get that social support and feeling like I'm not alone worrying about climate change, but also that feeling of collective agency, that actually together we can do more. And so whether that be as a community or through sort of, your role as a citizen or in the workplace, for example. So I think it's trying to think about the multiple roles that people have and emphasising that there's actually a lot more that people can do than maybe they originally think.
Yeah, completely agree with what Lorraine has said there. It's collective agency and organisations which give people a meaningful sense of being all in it together and having safety in numbers at the local level, which really counts. There is one example though of where individual action could matter, and it's pretty underexplored. And our colleague Steve Westlake has done some great recent work on this. We can send you the link, where he's talking about the need for prominent individuals, whether in government or business, to lead by example. And this would be a great motivator. There is good evidence for that. This would be a great motivator for individual citizens. And it would also increase the credibility of the messages coming from decision makers. So the idea that prominent individuals can lead by example is something that's beginning to emerge in the literature. And we can send you a link to Steve's really interesting recent work on that.
Thank you. Rich has just come with a question, observation here about climate change, net zero, creates separation in the minds, so people find it easier to dismiss the overall crisis by refuting net zero, getting that climate change and species ecological decline are interlinked. A change in terms and language is needed to help this. I'll rephrase that. A question: is there a change in terms and language needed to help this issue?
I mean, I think the central government in its consultation currently is exploring some of these issues. I think about how to frame and message, and the idea of thinking about better lives, and that sort of thing it seems to be something that's emerging in the narrative a bit more, I think, by public authorities. And actually, I had a look on WECA website and noticed similar language being used on your website. So I think there is a recognition that the term net zero is not necessarily going to strike a chord with everyone and could be counterproductive, especially now in the context of greater politicization of the issue. So I agree with you, and I'm not sure. Yeah, I suppose language is important, but it's not the final sort of the final issue. And I mean, for me, there's also the issue around challenging perceptions. So in our survey, we found that people felt that lack of public will was also an obstacle to change and to climate action and environmental action. And so people perhaps there's a sense that they were underestimating other people's concern. When we look at the evidence, we see that actually people in general are very concerned across the board. I mean, some more than others, but there is strong kind of anxiety and concern. So that is another issue, I think, is showing that it's something that we share as a concern, and therefore focusing on those collective actions is helpful. And also, people often think about obstacles in terms of their own individual actions. I can't afford it. I can't afford the organic food or the an electric car and so forth. But actually, when we think more collectively, rather than framing it as always as an individual issue, then I think that can be maybe productive more widely.
Thanks, Alice. We're just about to come up to the end of our time, I'm afraid. If there are any other questions, would it be okay to sort of drop them through to you guys and just sort of bring them up? And I think we would like to just continue the conversation around kind of the mesh governance idea as well. So if I come through to you, Ian, on that one, and maybe or convene whoever. So if I can just say thank you to Alice, to Ian, and to Lorraine for the talk today, and hopefully you found it useful, some of the questions coming back, and I hope everybody else has found it really valuable. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Great to see you all.
Yeah, Thanks for your time, everyone. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.